You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the Options Insider Radio Network, where we go beyond our traditional stomping grounds of your Apple and your VIX and your SPY and maybe some meme stock options, and look a little bit farther afield, see what's lighting up the tape over there in the land of Bitcoin and ETH and all the other crypto kitties out there these days. Going to talk the volume, the volatility, the SKEW, the OI, and a whole bunch more. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the aforementioned network. Pleased to have so many of you joining us out here today. And of course, if you want to get access to us live, not just for this show, but for everything we do throughout the week, as well as our pro Q&As, another great one coming up tomorrow, as well as the unusual activity and live trading, a lot of fun live trading going on over there as well. Then gone over to the optionsinsider.com/secret club, and you can join up for all that fun and a whole bunch more, including like our pro trading crates, which we just gave another one away an hour or so ago. So you got to get into the club to be eligible for all that fun. I'm looking at a stack of stuff over here that we're just dying to give away to you folks. So get on over there, theoptionsinsider.com/secret club to begin your journey to the dark side. Speaking of journeying to the dark side, I got a good compatriot to join me on today's journey into the heart of crypto darkness. None other than Mr. Greg Magadini, the co-founder over there at Genesis Volatility. Greg, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown.
Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you on the show as we dive right on into the Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we break down exactly what the name implies, the week that was and indeed still is in the world's leading digital asset, which is, of course, the big dog, Bitcoin. A little bit smaller than it was on our last show out there. But Greg, before we dive into all that fun, it's been a little bit since you joined us. You were last on the show, back at the end of August. We've seen a little bit of, I think to put it mildly, topsy-turviness out there in the Bitcoin market, including our recent mini flash crash there over the weekend a couple of weeks ago. So catch us up. What's been lighting up your tape and catching your eye since the last time we chatted over there at Genesis Volatility, sir?
Absolutely. Happy to fill everyone in. So in the markets, we had BITO, the ProShares Bitcoin ETF, and the Valkyrie Bitcoin ETF come out. That decision had a huge move in the vol markets for Bitcoin. We saw a huge squeeze in implied volatility for Bitcoin options. And we saw like a $400,000 print of premium go through over 200 implied vol, which was super interesting to see that happen, all based off that decision of the approval. And something else that kind of followed through to the ETH markets was a huge increase in implied volatility at the time being for ETH. So people were speculating, hey, CME also has Ethereum futures, which is the underlying component for these ETFs. So if BITO can come out for Bitcoin, maybe ETH is the next one down the line. And maybe we'll see a futures-based Ethereum ETF coming online soon. And in the vol market, what we saw is that we saw some players come in, a bunch of calls across all maturities. We had a huge increase in SKEW to the Ethereum call side a few days after the approval of the Bitcoin ETF. And then that slowly bled through, and now we're back down to par for longer expirations and so on and so forth. So long story short is that this Bitcoin ETF approval had a huge effect in the vol markets. And so that was pretty interesting to witness and look at.
That was an interesting development. We'll get to all that in a second, ETH, and of course a whole bunch more in a little bit. I'm curious for you. A lot of people had a little bit of hand-wringing going on over the past couple of weeks there, Greg, when we saw, like I said, that mini flash crash over the weekend. We saw the vol kind of spike and then come right back down as it is wont to do these days. What are your thoughts on those recent developments and the evolution we saw out there? I really can't even call it evolution, the brief change we saw out there in vol as a result.
Yeah, so we've had this for the past couple months. We've had this theme of kind of persistently high implied volatility relative to realized volatility. So I would say for almost the past 4 or 5 months, the traded at the money implied vol has kind of held around the same levels, but the realized volatility is what's been swinging around. And until this flash crash, we've just had a huge premium of implied to realized. And finally, this flash crash did pay off vol buyers after a long wait, so to speak. Something that we saw as well is that people are playing these futures and perpetual swaps. They're getting exposure by using these levered long vehicles or getting leveraged long in these vehicles. And so we had pretty much a big sort of flushing of the leveraged players on this mini flash crash. And so that extended volatility for those products compared to spot prices. So that was something that's pretty interesting. And then kind of the last note there is that people like to trade these futures basis trades, so the cash and carry, buy spot, sell the future against it, and basically capture that carry. So that before the mini flash crash, that was yielding about 15% per year, and now we briefly went negative, but we went pretty much par during the flash crash, and then now we're about 6% in that basis trade. So people are a lot less feeling less enthused of getting levered long again, and so those yields have come down a lot.
Let's dive into all that and a whole bunch more. If you're wondering, how does Greg know all this stuff? Well, he's the creator of a little platform we like to use on this show quite a bit called Genesis Volatility. You guys can kick the tires and light the fires for yourselves. It's pretty easy. Just go to GVOL.io. That's the place to go to begin your journey to the dark side of crypto analytics. And if you do so, you'll see a lot of fun stuff. Of course, we have seen a bit of a sell-off, like I mentioned, in the big dog, even since our last show, north of 49,000 on our last show, 49,151. Coming into today's show, a little bit shy of the 46K level, 45,984. So a little bit over 3,000 points to the dark side. We did briefly struggle back over 50K listeners. It was almost 52,000, 51,960 back after our show last week. That was on Tuesday. And the low was actually in this morning, 46,735. So we had a little bit of a range out there, not quite as wide as the 17,000 point range we saw during that crazy sell-off over the weekend, but still a little bit of a range on the tape last week. And that means all of that translating into a whole heck of a lot of nothing from a vol perspective. We were at about an 82% in terms of our, our average at the money vol coming into the show last week. And this week, a whopping 81. Greg, you kind of alluded to it earlier, only half jokingly. You said the flash crash finally got vol buyers in crypto paid off ever so briefly. We've seen a similar pattern play out in equity vol as well, whereas if you're loading up on, let's say, VIX calls or something along those lines, usually, the last week or so, notwithstanding where we had a little bit of a protracted volatility, but usually you have hours, sometimes minutes when the vol spikes to have to hit that bid and get the heck out of Dodge. And we have seen lately in the crypto space, whenever there are these vol spikes, they are very short-lived. During the meltdown, we saw a pop into the triple digits ever so briefly in Bitcoin vol, and then right back down to pretty much where we were, right around the low 80% range as well. Is this a pattern you've noticed of late as well out there in Bitcoin options, Greg, that, if you're a vol buyer, you kind of got to act quickly when you get these moves?
Yeah, that's been a trend for about the past 4 or 5 months. And the term structure has just been stubbornly contango, but not only contango, but rather steep contango. So it's just been one of those things that if you're buying vol, you definitely got to take those out.
Yeah, you can't hang out. You can't wait to say, I'm going to go a little bit higher. You got to start hitting those bids second you get the opportunity. And it has been that way in equity volatility for most of the year as well. Interesting stuff. Greg, the question we get a lot, and I think you and I have discussed this before on the show when it comes to Bitcoin vol in particular, is Bitcoin vol, is it starting to act like gold vol and precious metals vol, which is, if you see a spike, it's pretty abrupt and it's pretty short-lived, and then it comes right back down. The analogy is made all the time is Bitcoin, digital gold. I don't want to get into that, but from a vol perspective, are you starting to see some similarities, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I could say for the recent history has really been like that. It's been one of those situations where not only has vol kind of spikes in the realized space been short-lived, but the implied space is so, or at least was so expensive to be realized that a lot of it was priced in.
It was indeed. And that's where we find ourselves out there in the Bitcoin vol landscape. Speaking of Bitcoin vol, our buddy Simon Ho over there at T3 likes to crunch his numbers over there. He has his, what he refers to as kind of the Bitcoin VIX, aka Bit vol. That's seen a little bit of an uptrend of late. Last week, it was about an 87.3. This week, 93.5. Again, that's kind of more of a rolling 30-day measure, similar to what we see in VIX. And of course, Spikes, which is the VIX competitor or analog that he created over there on SPY. So taking that same methodology and applying it to Bitcoin options. If you have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, any of those words sound crazy to you, check out some of our educational content on the network. They will walk you through it all. And Greg, you're kind of talking about SKEW out there. We have seen some interesting swings even over the course of the past week. On our last show, SKEW was decidedly negative, almost negative 7.5. Coming into today's show, we're seeing that SKEW get clipped a bit. Still negative, but negative 3.5 or so. What's been catching your eye recently from a SKEW perspective, Greg?
Yeah, I think the SKEW is very interesting. So whereas the sort of implied vol space has been kind of steady, the SKEW's been reacting nicely to the underlying market moves. So obviously during the sell-off, we had sort of a low in SKEW led by the shorter end of the expiration cycles. But this past week, we've seen a nice recovery in SKEW. So basically, we're negative for everything below 180 days until expiration. And this is where I think something really interesting is happening as far as like a potential trade idea. I think there's a big potential for, rate hikes in the macro space to kind of bleed through to the crypto space and maybe cause a fundamental reason for cryptos to trade lower, even though just briefly at some point trade a little bit lower. But the more the farther out expirations are cheaper in terms of buying the puts than the short-term expirations. And for the short-term side of the space, December, for whatever reason, there's just a seasonal component to December. I mean, we see that in the vol space. We see that also in sort of different markets where they're less likely to be crazy in December, but at the same time, the put skew is most expensive for the shortest expiration. So you can actually, put on, sell the call, buy the put on the 180 days out portion of the curve, and go ahead and sell the put, buy the call for the cheaper stuff, and basically, or even just sell the put against the put you own, and basically finance positive carry skew trade. And then if we do get these rate hikes in 2022, you're well covered.
Interesting. We have talked a lot about collars of late out there, and you're right. Traditionally, it was a great trade. The puts were pretty cheap. The calls were extremely juicy, and so it made it very attractive to put on collars. You can get very tight protection and get a lot of upside, and sometimes even get credits for it, depending on how you structure that. You're right. Now we have seen a little bit of a sell-off. Those puts finally starting to catch a bit of a bid out there, Greg. So it sounds like if you are going to do the collars now, you have to take a little bit more of the approach you're talking about, push the put farther out and do kind of the collar longer term, and then I guess the bullish risk reversal near term, Greg.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I like that. I haven't seen that discussed in terms of the collar versus the near dated bullish risk reversal. I kind of like that play. And again, it does take into account what we're seeing, the evolution of the skew. That's something we've been talking about for a while. When are these puts going to start to finally get some life to them? And we've been selling off for a couple of weeks. And that's something I've been saying, it's going to take a protracted sell-off to get those puts to start catching fire. Still not catching fire from an OI perspective. So let's get out there now and start breaking down the numbers a little bit. OI coming into Showtime. Again, this is all from Deribit, which is still the big dog out there in the crypto options landscape. Other exchanges starting to come along, starting to build up some OI, but it's still pretty much all Deribit all the time out there. And coming into Showtime, there were about 134,500 calls open out there. It's slightly up about 3,700 from this time last week. Puts actually down a little bit. Puts down to about 64,200. It's down about 3,400 from this time last week. You may be a little bit shocked by that, but again, it's not terribly surprising. As we're selling off and breaking through strikes, people are going to want to take some of those puts off, you would think. That's what protection is for at the end of the day. Now, if you have another sharp sell-off, we may start seeing people actually start putting on some OI again, but we're still roughly 2-to-1 calls over puts out there. And in terms of where you folks are lining up from a monthly perspective, where all the action is, it's been all quarterlies all the time, and that remains the case. December is far and away the leading proponent for Bitcoin options open interest. Almost 107,000 contracts open right now, up nearly 5,000 from this time last week. March is a distant number two with about 26, almost 27,000 contracts open. It's up about 1,100, but it's obviously far behind December, and then there's nothing else even close. You got some weeklies out there that are popping up, but nothing even close to March. And Greg, this is something you guys I know brought up recently on your Twitter over there, which if you're not following them over there at Genesis Vol, Genesis Vol, all one word, you should be. A lot of great data coming out from these guys throughout the week. You made an interesting analysis out there, just how much OI is going to roll off the board at the end of the year, and what potential ramifications this may have for the crypto options landscape going forward. Why don't you summarize it for our audience here, sir?
Yeah, sure. So like you said earlier, the December 31st or the end of the year contract is slightly over 50% of the open interest. And so something to keep in mind is that these types of large expirations, people like them a lot, especially in traditional markets where market makers will be hedging with the underlying going into expiration, and that can move the underlying. In crypto, the market's still rather small in terms of notional open interest compared to the Bitcoin market cap. So it's about, we call it 1.5% of the Bitcoin market cap, whereas if I'm looking at SPY, which is the S&P 500 ETF, that's like 200% of the market cap. So the crypto space is still rather small for that notional interest, but there's still an effect. I don't think it's big enough to affect spot prices, but everyone who's market making on Deribit is looking at that Deribit perp or those Deribit futures as hedges. So going to a big expiration like this, where you can see sort of gamma rebalancing or delta rebalancing and sort of gamma scalping, is going to be in the perpetual contracts. And so sometimes you'll see moves where, the funding flips from positive to negative, the cash and carry trades become extra wide or extra narrow, and then the differential, the spread between the perp and the futures themselves can move around a lot. So I think these large types of expirations, especially this one, which is 50% of the notional open interest, could have an effect in those basis trades, and there could be opportunity there.
I'm hard pressed to think off the top of my head of another major options asset class we talk about here on the network that's going to have 50% of its OI roll off the board by the end of the year. Not many. That does make crypto a little bit unique, and it'll be interesting to see when we come in to the new year, listeners. What are we looking at as a result? How is this new OI going to shape up? Is it going to remain this still predominantly 2-to-1 call over put setup, or are we going to see something a little bit different? And particularly if towards the end of the year we retain this sell-off trend we've been on for the last couple of weeks out here. Let's see what's going on from a size position perspective. What are you folks trading? What are these size open positions out there in Bitcoin options right now? Well, it's still, like I mentioned, all calls all the time. And it's still the big dog, the par strike, the 100,000 strike that is leading the dance with 15,000 contracts open. Surprisingly enough, it hasn't changed since last week. It's about unched from this time last week. The same for number two. Number two is also the ever optimistic 80,000 strike, looking a little more optimistic this week than last. That's also at about 11,000 contracts open, also unchanged from this time last week. So the two big dogs haven't really budged over the course of the past week. Number three is the 120,000 strike. So if 80K and 100K, not doing it for you, not rich enough for your blood, the 120,000 strike is there for you at number three with 11,000 contracts opens up about 1,000 from this time last week. Number four is a newcomer, the 60,000 strike. That seems comparatively reasonable compared to all the others out there. It's got about 9,300 contracts open. That's a newcomer, like we said, so we don't have a change from this time last week. And number five is the 70,000 strike with about 9,200 contracts open. That's up slightly, up about 200 contracts from this time last week. Greg, going forward as we roll into this new year and 50% of the OI comes off the board, how do you expect these top positions to look going forward? Do you think we're going to see pretty much the same strikes still dominating the tape, the par strikes and all that stuff? Or you think maybe we'll see a little bit different, maybe some new strikes percolating in there?
Yeah, I think we'll actually probably be a little bit closer to the money for some of these plays. Like you said earlier, the $60,000 calls, especially for end of year, those have had a huge jump in open interest. And it's also been sort of the one of the most popular traded contracts as of late. And so I think people are trading, closer to the money stuff, kind of recalibrating the potential for, huge moves. And so, especially coming off the back of a lower realized vol environment, for the exception of the flash crash last week, I think people are going to start building positions closer to the money for the most part going into the early part of 2022.
Yeah, if we keep selling off for the rest of the year, I'm with you. I would have a hard time seeing massive size diving into the par strike again. Anything's possible in Bitcoin. We have seen crazier things. But if everyone's diving back in January to the par strike, that kind of shows you what's afoot out here in Bitcoin world going forward. Not a lot of foot from a notional OI perspective. Again, we said that didn't really change much in the top positions, and the overall OI didn't change. Let's come back in the first week of January to see how this number changes. It's going to be quite different as 50% rolls off the board. But right now, there's about 10 billion worth of notional volume open on Deribit and about a little over 11 billion if you add in all the rest of the venues. Speaking of the rest of the venues, let's see who's number two. It's a hot fight for number two, and CME just managing to edge out LedgerX. CME at 323 million worth of notional OI out there. LedgerX at about 318 million for number three. But interesting, again, LedgerX now part of that new conglomerate there. So interesting to see how those new resources may help change the game for LedgerX going forward. Speaking of the notional volume that was trading this week, a decently active week, all things considered, but not a ton of paper. We had 2 days threatening 1 billion worth of notional volume, about 850 million on each of those days in the middle of the week. The rest of the week, less. So again, no days $2 billion or threatening $3 billion, nothing like that. But I guess you can call it heavy. Certainly much more than we saw back in the light days of summer. But then again, we are coming up towards the end of the year, and the latter portion of December does look a little bit like the dog days of August from a volume perspective. So we might start seeing a volume trail off a little bit here as we get deeper into the holiday season. Greg mentioned all things BITO out there. Let's get out to CME now and see what's going on out there from a CME product perspective. Coming into showtime, we saw some action on the options, not a ton last week. The most recent trading day was obviously Friday, only about 50 contracts going up there. The OI ticking up ever so briefly, up about 100 to nearly 1,300 out there. So not a huge rock'em sock'em robots week. Again, we are starting to head into the teeth of the holiday season here. Same deal on the futures front. Only about 7,000 going up on Friday, and the OI ticking up nominally up to about 300 to about 13,500. Greg, you mentioned the BITO product before. That, of course, trades off of the futures at CME. I haven't had a chance to really pick your brain on this product since it launched. What are your thoughts on it overall? Have you had a chance to trade any of the options on BITO, B? And then C, what do you think about the prospects for eventually maybe getting the much ballyhooed spot ETF, sir?
Yeah, so for your second question, I've done a few flies on the BITO product myself. As far as what I think about the product, I think the main attraction that's interesting about this product is the optionality on it. So for the most part, if you're just going to hold coin, I don't even think buying any ETF. I would just buy the coin, store it in your wallet, get a hardware wallet. If it's not your keys, it's not your coins. But if you're going to trade products against it, in the market, whether it's futures or options, I think products like these are really interesting for the option side of it. Obviously, there's decaying components to the futures where, most of these future products are trading at a premium to the spot. So there's sort of this premium decay or basis decay over time, which is going to bleed through to that ETF. But you can definitely price that in. And if you're trading the options market, that really isn't going to be, that really isn't going to be the main factor of your options trading. So I do think this product's pretty interesting to get more people trading the crypto option space overall. And then for the Bitcoin spot ETF prospects, I'm probably not the best person to ask this, but from my perspective, it seems like it's just a matter of time, even though it sounds like there's always kind of extra hoops to jump through before we finally get them to allow it. But I think at some point it comes online. I know that custody has been a big issue for the crypto space in general because everyone's heard of the stories of getting your coins hacked, and no one wants to be a fiduciary, holding coins for an ETF, and then something happens like that where the coins get hacked. So I think that's the main concern for everyone is the custody component. But I think eventually, I don't see how one doesn't finally get approved at some point.
You're right. It definitely is exciting for our audience to finally have some options you can put in a securities account on Bitcoin. That's been blowing the doors off. To my knowledge, this is the fastest I've ever seen options listed by OCC on a new listing. Within 48 hours, these things were live, which is crazy. And they're doing decent paper. The ADV was up around 60-odd thousand the last I saw. So does this mean we're going to see maybe a BITO options section of GVOL coming soon, Greg?
Yeah, that's the plan. We're actually incorporating that TradFi data. Right now, we think there's a lot of interesting things to be done. There's, obviously the vol surface of BITO versus Bitcoin vol surface, things like that. But there's also other really cool, interesting things that we hope to incorporate soon. So, what's the correlation of Coinbase stock versus Bitcoin? And what does that vol surface look like versus Bitcoin vol surface? Or MicroStrategy versus Coinbase versus Bitcoin, things like that. So we're really excited about some of these new TradFi developments, and we will be incorporating them.
All right. Good to hear it. New tools available over there at GVOL coming soon. And I'm with you. I kind of dove into some flies as well on BITO. It was just too attractive. You had to try it, right? Might be fun to do some put flies now. They weren't that exciting before. That might be where the action is now. I'll have to go check them out after this show, though. Meanwhile, it's time for us to dive into our next segment. It is time to explore the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the show where we explore everything outside of the big dog Bitcoin, except for right now when we talk about the top 10, or as our mischievous producers like to do, they now extended it to a top 13. Wherever the heck Shiba and Doge are, that's what they're extending to now. That's just for some of our listeners in the live chat who I know like themselves a little bit of Shiba, maybe a little bit less these days, because number 13 is Shiba Inu. A little bit of a rough time, 17.5 billion open on Shiba right now. That's down, about 11% just in the last day, and over the last week, down about 8.5%. So a little bit of a drubbing out there in Shiba. Number 12 is Avalanche. This is one that a few of our guests recently have been speaking pretty highly of and is starting to gain a lot of attention. It's been fighting. I think it briefly flirted and made its way into the top 10 very briefly. Now holding firm at a number 12. That puts it at about 75.80 coming into the start of our show. That's off 13% just today and off about 16.5% on the week. So that meltdown, the sinking tide tends to drain all boats, and Avalanche getting sucked down with it as well. Number 11, Terra. That's at about 19.8. By the way, Avalanche at about 18.5 billion worth of market cap. Now let's get into the actual top 10, which is kicking off with Doge. a little bit over 20, about 20.2 billion worth of market cap. Doge off about 12% on the week here. Number 9, Polkadot. Polkadot taking a drubbing over the past 24 hours. At about 25, almost 26. That still puts it at about 25.3 billion worth of market cap, off 12.5% in the past 24 hours. Only about a little bit less than 5% over the course of the past week. Number 8 is XRP. That one's at about 36.2 billion worth of market cap, off about almost 10% over the past day and a little over 3% on the week. A lot of these names getting hit hard in the past 24 hours. Number 7, it's Cardano, back to about 120 or so. So this one taking a drubbing since it was flirting with the 2 handle not too long ago, off 11% on the day and about 9, almost 10% on the week. Good still for about 40 billion worth of market cap out there. Number 6, it's everyone's favorite USD coin at about 41.5 billion. This one kind of unched on the week and on the days. This one kind of holding firm out there, bucking the trend. Number 5, it's Solana. Who knew this name could finally sell off? Because it is off about 13, almost 14% over the past day and off nearly 20% on the week. Coming into showtime is at about a 150. So Solana, after threatening and blowing through the 200 level, now finally coming back to, I won't say normalcy because the thing is still up tremendously since the beginning of the year, but a little bit off those crazy highs it hit not too long ago. Still good for about 46 billion worth of market cap in the number 5 spot on our top 10. Number 4, it's Tether at about 76.5 billion. Again, not seeing huge move in Tether on the week. Number 3, Binance Coin, 85.5 billion. Off nearly 10% today and about 10% for the week as well. So that's pretty much the change for the week is what we saw over the past 24 hours. Number 2, you know what it is. It's ETH at about 437 billion. ETH's off about 11% on the day and about almost 12% for the week. And of course, the big dog, which is Bitcoin, 867 billion. So again, well shy of the 1T level, off about 8% in the past 24 hours. And I actually said off about 6% or so on the week. Let's get out to everyone's favorite number 2. For many of you, it's number 1. It is ETH. And again, as I mentioned, looking a little bit softer this week than it did last week. It was a little bit shy of 4,200, about 4 handles shy of 4,200 on our last show. Coming into today's show, a little bit north of the 3,700 level, 3,737 to be precise. That puts it down about almost 460 handles from where it was this time last week. And that's pretty much also the bottom level of the range. It got as high as almost 4,500. That was back last Wednesday, the 8th, 4,490 to be precise. And again, the sell-off coming into the start of the show today was the low, 37.37. So we'll see. Can it trend lower? We shall find out. Vol-wise, we have seen for a while ETH being a little bit frothier than Bitcoin. It has been hanging out or flirting with that triple-digit level for a while, and it's back up there again. It was at about 98% on our last show, coming into today's show at about 102% out there. Greg, you kicked off the show talking about ETH. I know for you, ETH is kind of your number 1. You really pay a lot of attention to ETH and the vol out there. So what's been catching your eye from an ETH price action and an ETH vol perspective, sir?
Yeah, so actually, last newsletter, we noted that A lot of this sell-off was driven in the Bitcoin space, and the sort of the vol surface reacted in a similar fashion, whereas ETH was relatively strong and didn't have quite sort of the same bear signals in the vol surface. So we've seen a lot of kind of the institutional banks calling for the flippening of ETH versus Bitcoin. That's still something that's on my long-term radar. And so I think that's been pretty interesting. Obviously this week, it's not looking like the case where we're seeing kind of weakness in both cryptos. So I'm not sure that necessarily ETH is going to outperform on the downside right now. It's not looking too hot.
Yeah, I don't think the flippening is happening this week, Greg. I hate to burst your bubble. not coming this week. Maybe next week. We'll see, but not quite there. I still love that term, the flippening. It just cracks me up. Let's go out to the SKEW now, looking a little bit more negative this time than it was this time last week. About -5 on our last show, about 5.1 coming into today's show. Almost -8, about -7.8. Again, that kind of is in line with what we're seeing from a price action perspective. As we continue to see drawdowns in these major assets, we're going to start seeing the SKEW get more negative, and again, see some of this maybe downside start to come to life. Speaking of things coming to life, let's see if the puts are starting to kick it into high gear, or if we're actually, as we saw with Bitcoin, maybe taking some off as we're breaking through strikes. Coming into showtime, calls leading the dance over there on Deribit. 1.2 million calls open when we kicked off the show. It's up about 40,000 from this time last week. So more calls on the tape, go figure. And about 494,000 puts open. That's actually down about 10,000. Again, similar phenomenon to what we're seeing in Bitcoin. As we sell off, we're actually seeing people take their puts off, which again, that's what they're for. Start to fault them. So we're not seeing exactly the explosion in OI. Again, when the DECE bubble rolls off the board, it'll be interesting to see what's going on with that notional value of that OI. Again, we haven't seen a huge change in terms of the OI, so we haven't seen a huge change in that notional value. Still about 7 billion worth of OI open out there on Deribit. And again, when you're talking about venues, when it comes to ETH, it's pretty much all Deribit. There's really nothing else to even speak of out there. OKEX has a little bit, about 121 million worth of notional, and that's really about it. Bit.com has about 100 million. But outside of those two, it's pretty much all Deribit all the time. All 7 billion is there on Deribit. And we had I guess you can call it an active week. Wasn't blowing the doors off. The most active day was the 10th, with about 585 million worth of volume going up. The rest of the week, decidedly less. So, Greg, anything coming across your radar from a SKEW perspective and just the overall trading activity we've been seeing in ETH of late, sir?
Yeah, we saw a lot of interesting activity. So March 2022, $15,000 calls have been abnormally popular. So everyone's been piling into these things, both from a long and short side. So it's kind of like we see the long volume and the short volume, kind of increase open interest together. So there's definitely a two-way market for these, so to speak. And so we've been seeing some really interesting stuff there. The vol surface was, to no surprise, for a long time expensive in March and expensive in December. Now it's starting to normalize slightly, where we don't have the same crazy steepness that we did before. So that's pretty interesting for the ETH space. And kind of the last note around that particular strike is that's Raoul Powell's favorite strike from Real Vision. So he's been talking a lot about buying some of those options. And so I think a lot of his audience have been trading that market as well. So that's really been kind of the highlight of the abnormal ETH activity that we've been seeing.
Let's get into what we're seeing over there, how this OI is breaking down. What are the size positions? Go figure. It's still all December all the time in ETH options. 721,000 contracts open right now in December. That's up 11,000 from this time last week. March, not quite as distant of a player in ETH options as it is in Bitcoin options. I mean, ETH has almost 400,000 open, 393,000. That's up quite a bit over the course of this past week. So we're starting seeing more action in March. Part of the reason for that is that ETH just seems to trade predominantly in the quarterlies anyway. So March has been more active for quite some time versus March, just kind of starting to come on the radar in the Bitcoin options front. They don't tend to be as crazy about the quarterlies in Bitcoin as they are in ETH, where it's pretty much all quarterlies, and that's really where the game is played. And number 3, not even worth discussing, not much else really even close. Greg was just talking about the strikes. Let's see what the size positions are out there right now. Coming into Showtime, like I said, ETH was still hanging out in the 4,000 range, but not quite that high, not even really at the 4,500 level anymore. But still, the 15,000 strike maintains its hold on people's imaginations. It's got 120,000 contracts open. That's pretty much unched. In fact, like Bitcoin, the top positions are kind of unched this week as well in ETH. So that's unched on the 15,000 strike. Number 2, we have the 10,000 strike. So if 15,000 is a little bit too optimistic for you, let's dial it back to 10,000. That's 117,000 contracts open there. That's also unched. So maybe a sign that OI is related. They are pretty close. Maybe some verticals going up between the two of those there. Number 3, the 5,000 strike. So much closer to the fire than the rest there. 98,000 contracts open there. That one's actually down. It's down about 12,000 contracts from this time last week. Number 4 is the 6,000 strike. That has 90,000 contracts open. It's actually up about 6,000 from this time last week. And number 5, we have a newcomer to our top 5, the 8,000 strike. That has about 69,000 contracts open. And again, that's new to our top 5, so we don't have the change from this time last week. I'm curious, Greg, we were just talking about Bitcoin and this massive cliff that we're all going to go over with OI when December rolls off the board. It's pretty sizable in ETH as well. Do you have any thoughts or concerns about that when December rolls off the board? We're going to see something maybe a little bit different as a result going into the new year?
I think the same kind of concepts can play there. It's really going to be mostly expressed in the futures and perpetuals as opposed to the spot prices. But yeah, I think just like we could see some interesting dislocations during the Bitcoin expiration, we could see the same thing for this year-end expiration for ETH.
We certainly could indeed. Let's get on out to some of the ETH futures over there at CME. Actually had some action out there of late. Not so much on the trading side. The OI on the ETH futures at CME kind of unched from last week, still around 4,700 out there. And in terms of trading activity, right around 4,000 on the most recent trading day, about 4,100 on Friday. But the action came in the listing of new products. In fact, CME just last week during our Showtime launched a new micro ETH contract. So if the previous ETH contract was a little bit rich for your blood, and I can understand it, it was, I believe, a 50 multiplier on that bad boy. That's a lot. It's a lot of ETH to bite off. This new micro contract is probably a little bit more suitable for you out there. It just launched on December 6th. If you want to know all about micro ETH, check out our TWIFO program, This Week in Futures Options, that we recorded just last week. I had the head of crypto over there at CME and equities come on to talk all about micro ETH, why they launched it, what's going on with the contract, the reasoning behind it. Also, pick their brain a bit about the position limits for BITO. That was a hot topic very recently. A lot of people thought maybe the position limits would be the doom, the end of the BITO product, like we saw something similar happen with USO. They were a little bit concerned about that. So if you have concerns as well, you want to know more about micro ETH, BITO, position limits, all that kind of stuff, and a whole bunch more, check out our episode of TWIFO on the network already. And looking at the action out there in the micro ETH product, doing some decent paper. The OI is already up to about 3,001 actually, to be precise. And we saw nearly 13,000 contracts going up on Friday, a day that was otherwise pretty sleepy overall. Greg, I know you like to watch ETH. I'm sure you were paying attention to these micro ETH futures. Any thoughts on these, sir? Do these maybe resonate with you a little more than the large traditional ETH futures did?
Yeah, I think these are a great move for the retail space. Just like the micro Bitcoin futures, I think both of these are so much more attainable and have a bigger audience than those huge contracts. So very excited about that. The funny thing was the ETH futures, that when that thing came out, it actually wasn't too bad. I mean, but ETH rallied so much that the contract just became unmanageable for smaller traders. So very happy to see this micro future out and about.
Yeah, an interesting one. Again, check out that show if you want to learn more, listeners. And if you want to play in ETH, you wanted a more, let's say, regulated, centralized exchange to do so, than maybe the micro ETH futures. I did ask him about the options. You can hear about that on that episode as well. Let's get on out to some of the rest of the altcoin universe. I kind of mentioned some of this when we talked about the top 10 there. XRP selling off a bit this week. Coming into showtime is at about 77.5 cents. It puts it down almost 2.5 cents from this time last week. Our guest on the show last week from D-Chain, they seemed optimistic that we might see a resolution to this whole SEC versus XRP issue sometime in the near future. That'd be nice, one way or the other, to have some resolution. If you can't touch it, I guess that's not good, but at least we have some sort of clarity there versus this kind of question mark hanging over its head. And if it's cleared to trade, then, well, that's great for a lot of you folks out there on who I know have been champing at the bit to get at XRP and obviously haven't been able to for quite some time now. Dogecoin, we already talked about it, selling off quite a bit, 15.5 cents coming into today's show, about 17.5 cents on our last show. So down a whopping 2 cents almost from this time last week. Litecoin, it had its brief time in the sun with that whole pump and dump around Walmart. Hasn't really quite hit those levels again. It was on about 153.5 on our last show, 145.90 coming into today's show. So down 7, almost 8 handles on the week. Cardano, like we said, coming into today's show, $1.22. It was at 135 last week. This one's taken quite the hit over the past couple of months out there as well, and down another 13 cents this week. Polkadot, another one kind of giving up some of the ghosts, not quite as much as the others, down about 90 cents. It was about 27.20 on our last show, and coming into today's show at about 26.30. Solana, quite the hit out there. Nearly 190 on our last show, about 189 and change. Coming into today's show, 154 and about a half. Puts it down almost 35 handles from this time last week. And of course, Shiba down a whopping 0.000003 over the course of the past week. And before we roll out of here, let's dive in really quickly into some of your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, let's get out to the crypto questions. Greg, this one's coming at you. I think from our live chat, I think you got people excited talking about the upcoming BITO options in GVOL. They seem to be all a Twitter, all a buzz about it. We've got Options Queen asking us right now, when will we see the BITO options listed in GVOL? So there you go, Greg. You put yourself on the hook for an actual release date now. When can they get their hot little hands on it?
I love it. Well, we're hoping in January.
Hoping in January. There you go. So by sometime, Queen, there, by the end of January, you should be able to get your hot little hands there on all things BITO options at GVOL. All right, that music means we've come to the end here for this episode. Of course, if you want more information on anything we talked about here on the show today, or maybe you're a little bit confused by some of the concepts, you're new to the world of options. I know a lot of you are these days, and make sure you're subscribed to the full network so you can get access to a lot of our educational content like Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio, 2 great starter shows for you guys. If you get a little bit more advanced, graduate maybe to the option block or volatility views, all the other fun stuff we do here on the network. And of course, if you get really advanced, you want to join us in the secret club, theoptionsinsider.com/secret club is the place to go to learn more. And Greg, before we go, you already teased us with BITO. That's pretty exciting. If you got any other hints or any other teases of cool new stuff you guys have up your sleeve over there at GVOL that you want to leave with our audience, now is the time, sir. The floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. So one of the main things we've been working on is it's a little bit more of an institutional product, but we have our API solution out, which has really high granularity data, 1-minute data for a lot of interesting things. You can look at open interest over 1 minute, see how that ticks with volume, things like that, as well as a lot of volatility stuff. So really excited about that. We are incorporating some more DeFi option protocols. Right now you can find Open on OPYN on our platform, and we're looking to do OPYN, Siren Protocol, Data Nuts, and a bunch of other ones coming online here soon. And then lastly, the traditional finance data we're really excited about. Again, we think comparing vol surfaces for various products in the space versus crypto vol surface could be really interesting. And so that should be coming in pretty soon as well. We have our weekly newsletter that has a volatility market recap. You can find that at genesisvolatility.substack.com. You can visit our site, gvol.io, and you can follow us on Twitter at GenesisVol.
All right, Greg, I lied. You're not done yet. We got another question coming in for the live chat now. I'm a nice guy, so I'll squeeze them in.
Love it.
We've got Luigi. He wants to know, are the big players getting more involved in Bitcoin and crypto right now? He says Goldman's, Morgan Stanley's, et cetera. So what are you seeing from an institutional involvement level, Greg?
Yeah, I can't disclose any specific names, but big names that we all know are definitely trading crypto options, and they have been signing up for an API in order to do that.
And is it still mostly Bitcoin, or are they starting to maybe spread their wings a little bit, dip into ETH and some other things?
Yeah, we see interest in ETH and Bitcoin, and we actually get a lot of questions about altcoins as well. People are starting to ask about where can they find optionality for altcoins.
I like it. I like it. Good news there. So from your lips, Luigi's, to the market's ears, we see some new players in there. New players is always good for liquidity, for volume, and everything else. And of course, you guys know where to go if you want to learn more about everything Greg just laid down. gvol.io is the place to go to learn more. We got to get on out of here, but again, we'll be back tomorrow. Pro Q&A, Mr. Steve Sosnick, the options strategist, the chief options strategist over there at IB. He's willing and able and very excited to answer all of your options related questions. Of course, Wednesday, a double dose of live Q&A action. We've got a live huddle coming up with Mr. Overby, as well as a live options boot camp. So 2 ways for you folks to get at us with even more of your questions. Man, we're just here for you folks these days, answering all of your questions. Thursday, we got Mr. Derek, who kind of runs all things options over there at CME. You want to know more about the crypto options and everything else? Tune into TWIFO this week. You'll hear more from Derek. Then, of course, episode 2 of the Option Block. Friday, we got Vol Views. Mr. Jem Carson coming back on. You folks liked him. He had a ball last time, wanted to come back on. We're squeezing him back in on Friday. And, of course, for all you Secret Club folks, it's Options Oddities after that. Then we kick off another week with another episode of the Crypto Rundown. We'll see you then.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVOL, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVOL analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.